A king dragged from his palace by 7,000 women armed with kitchen knives. An emperor pelted with stale crusts in the middle of the Roman Forum. A president toppled after 30 years in power. Different centuries, different continents, different languages, same trigger. Not taxes, not war, not religion. Bread. The most ordinary food on the planet has started riots, funded pyramids, bankrolled empires, and burned monarchies to the ground. This is the story of how a flat piece of baked dough became the most dangerous food in human history. 14,000 years ago, there was no Egypt, no Rome, no France. There wasn't even farming yet. Just a group of hunter-gatherers called the Natufians living along the Jordan River in what's now Jordan, Israel, and Syria. In 2018, archaeologists digging at a site called Shubaika 1 found something that shouldn't have existed. Charred crumbs sitting in a stone fireplace over 14,000 years old. The oldest bread ever found. And here's the part that rewrote the textbooks. It came 4,000 years before anyone in that region planted a single seed of wheat. The Natufians weren't farmers. They were gathering wild barley and einkorn off the hillsides, crushing it between stones, mixing it with water, and cooking flat, gritty discs on hot rock. It wasn't good. Picture a cracker made of sand and stubbornness. But it travelled well, it kept for weeks, and it packed serious calories into something you could carry on a hunt. The cost was brutal, though. Skeletons from this period show the damage: worn knees, collapsed lower backs, arms shaped by years of grinding grain by hand, teeth ground down to nothing from all the stone dust baked into the flour. Bread kept the Natufians alive, and it wore their bodies out doing it. And still, they kept making it. That single habit may have changed the direction of human history. A growing number of archaeologists now argue it wasn't farming that gave us bread. It was the demand for bread that gave us farming. People wanted more of this stuff badly enough that they started planting the grain instead of just gathering it. Settlements formed around the fields. Grain stores needed guarding. Guarding needed organizing. Organizing needed someone in charge. Civilization didn't invent bread. Bread may have invented civilization. Fast forward to Egypt, and bread stops being survival food and becomes an entire economy. Bakeries along the Nile were turning out more than 50 different kinds of loaves. Round ones, braided ones, loaves shaped like animals for tombs in the Valley of the Kings. The symbol for bread showed up so often in hieroglyphics that it became one of the most common characters in the entire writing system. Then came the accident that changed everything. Somewhere near a brewery on the Nile, a batch of dough sat out too long. Wild yeast drifted in, found the sugar in the flour, and started eating. The dough rose. What came out of the oven wasn't the dense, flat cake humans had been eating for 10,000 years. It was soft. It was light. Leavened bread had arrived, completely by accident, and the Egyptians figured out how to bottle the magic by saving a scrap of that living dough to start the next batch. The Greeks mocked the Egyptians for it, calling them bread eaters, which was meant as an insult, the ancient version of calling someone basic. The Egyptians could not have cared less because they'd turned bread into currency. Literally. The men hauling stone blocks up the ramps at Giza weren't paid in coin. Records from the workers' village near the pyramids show a daily ration: 10 loaves of bread and a jug of beer, per worker, per day. Thousands of workers, thousands of loaves. Bakeries the size of factories, unearthed just south of the Sphinx. One of the greatest engineering projects humanity has ever pulled off ran on bread as fuel and bread as payment, which meant something else too. If the bread stopped, the pyramids stopped. Rome took that lesson and turned it into an art form. By the 1st century BCE, Rome had swelled to over 1 million people packed inside a city that couldn't grow enough grain to feed a fraction of them. So Rome imported it, shipping wheat from Egypt and North Africa, across the Mediterranean, up the Tiber, into warehouses that fed an empire. It was an enormous, fragile supply chain. One storm, or one pirate fleet, away from disaster. Roman politicians figured out the fix fast: give the grain away for free. The program was called the Annona, and it fed roughly 200,000 citizens. The poet Juvenal summed up the entire strategy in 2 words: bread and circuses. Feed people, entertain people, and they won't overthrow you. Starve them, and you're finished. Careers were built on this math. A politician named Gaius Gracchus rode subsidized grain to popularity in 123 BCE. Decades later, another lawmaker made the grain completely free and won over Rome's poor overnight. You didn't win a Roman election with a speech, you won it with wheat. And when the wheat didn't arrive, Rome showed its teeth. In 40 CE, a grain shortfall left the city with barely 2 weeks of reserves, and a mob cornered the Emperor Claudius in the Forum and pelted him with stale bread crusts. That's how thin the line was between order and riot in the ancient world's greatest city. The dependency never went away, and eventually it caught up with Rome completely. In the 430s CE, the Vandals seized North Africa and cut off the grain shipments from Carthage. The warehouses at the port of Ostia sat empty, the bakeries went cold. Within decades, the city that had ruled the known world shrank from over 1 million people to less than 50,000. An empire that built its stability on bread it couldn't grow itself collapsed the moment that bread stopped arriving. After Rome fell, bread didn't disappear, it just started marking exactly where you stood in society. In medieval England, a noble ate fine white bread called manchet, soft, pale, expensive. A peasant working that noble's fields ate a dark, coarse loaf padded out with rye, oats, whatever grain was left after the landlord took his cut, sometimes even ground acorns when the harvest failed. You could read someone's entire social rank off the colour of their dinner. And bread fraud was rampant enough that governments had to step in. Bakers were caught cutting flour with chalk, sawdust, ground bone, even alum to fake a whiter loaf. In 1266, King Henry III passed the Assize of Bread, tying the legal price and weight of a loaf directly to the cost of grain. Cheat your customers and you could be fined, humiliated in public, or have your oven smashed. That law stayed on the books for over 500 years. Bread wasn't a product you could gamble with, it was public infrastructure. Then came France, and the bill for centuries of bread politics finally came due. By the late 1780s, the French crown was buried in debt. The royal court at Versailles was spending like the money would never run out, and 2 straight years of terrible harvests had already crushed grain supplies. Then, a freak hailstorm in July of 1788 flattened crops across northern France, just weeks before harvest. By the spring of 1789, an average family in Paris was spending roughly 80% of its income on bread alone. Not rent, not clothes, bread, just to survive. Bakers, who were themselves getting crushed by flour prices, became the target of public rage. Mobs accused them of hoarding, of price gouging, of starving the poor on purpose. At least one Paris baker was dragged from his shop and hanged from a lamppost on nothing but rumour. The line about the Queen telling the poor to eat cake almost certainly wasn't hers. It shows up in a memoir written when Marie Antoinette was 9 years old, attributed to some unnamed princess. But it stuck to her anyway, because it captured something true. A queen living in obscene luxury while her people starved in the streets. On October 5th, 1789, that anger finally broke. Market women in Paris started gathering, and the crowd didn't stay small for long. By the time it moved, roughly 7,000 women were marching the 12 miles from Paris to Versailles through pouring rain, dragging cannons through the mud, carrying pikes, kitchen knives and muskets. They stormed the palace gates. They killed royal guards. By morning, the king had signed away his power, and the crowd marched the royal family back to Paris under guard, women walking alongside the carriage with loaves of bread hoisted on pikes, calling the king the baker all the way home. Philosophy gave the French Revolution its language, bread gave it fuel. By the 19th century, the fight over bread shifted from the streets to the factory floor. For thousands of years, grain had been ground between stone wheels, which produced a dense, dark, whole grain flour. Then, steel roller mills arrived from Central Europe, and for the first time it was cheap and easy to strip the bran and germ away, leaving pure white flour, the kind that used to be reserved for aristocrats. Suddenly, everyone could eat like a noble. But stripping the grain also stripped out most of its fibre and vitamins, and within a few decades, diseases tied to nutrient deficiency started climbing in populations that had switched heavily to white bread. Governments responded by forcing millers to add synthetic vitamins back in, essentially manufacturing a problem and then manufacturing the fix. Then came speed. In 1961, British researchers at Chorleywood developed a process that could take bread from raw flour to a finished loaf in under 4 hours, instead of the 12 to 18 hours traditional fermentation required. It used intense mechanical mixing, extra yeast, and chemical additives to fake the texture that slow fermentation used to build naturally. Today, roughly 80% of the bread sold in the UK still comes out of some version of that process, and it's spread to grocery shelves worldwide. That soft loaf in the plastic bag, the one that lasts 2 weeks on your counter, is a direct descendant of a laboratory shortcut invented 60 years ago. But strip away the marketing, the packaging, the shelf life, and bread's oldest power never went anywhere. In January of 2011, protesters filled Tahrir Square in Cairo, calling for the removal of a president who'd held power for nearly 30 years. The grievances were layered: corruption, unemployment, police violence, a demand for real elections. But underneath it all was a country that eats more bread per person than almost anywhere on earth. The Egyptian word for bread, aish, also means life. That's not poetic license, that's the literal word. For decades, the government had subsidized flatbread so heavily that people would wait in line for hours in brutal heat. And some of them died in those lines, not from violence, but from the sheer physical strain of waiting for food. When a president tried cutting that subsidy back in 1977, riots forced him to reverse the decision within 48 hours. In 2011, with global wheat prices spiking after droughts in Russia and Australia, that same pressure came back, and it didn't reverse this time. It's not a coincidence that the same years brought bread riots to Tunisia, food-driven unrest to Syria, and in 2018, a wheat subsidy cut in Sudan that helped end a 30-year presidency the following spring. Trace it all the way back, and it's the same line, unbroken, from a Natufian fireplace on the banks of the Jordan River to a city square in Cairo. Grind grain, and you get bread. Grow bread, and you get villages. Guard villages, and you get cities. Feed cities, and you get empires. And every single one of those empires learned the same lesson, usually too late. Keep the bread affordable, and the people stay calm. Let it slip out of reach, and nothing else you do will matter. Not the speeches, not the armies, not the palaces. 14,000 years, and the equation has never changed. Bread built civilization, and every so often it reminds civilization exactly who's in charge.